Hey guys, welcome to Solo ReacTalk. Today I'm going to be reacting to the hunt for Red Orktober, Legend of Kronan, made by Baldermort Guide to Warhammer. This is part of the Kronan to Kunnin playlist. Remember, if you want to check out my previous reactions, the playlist card will be at the top. Just click on it and be able to access them. If you want to check out the original video as well as Baldermort Guide to Warhammer YouTube channel, the links are in the description below. Last week we had the duel to the death between Kronan and Truth Smasher, and of course Kronan won. However, you know, he had to sacrifice a lot. He lost an arm. He is terribly beaten up from that duel, but he made it. It's just that he lost his arm. Yeah, let's continue with the hunt for Red Orktober. 3, 2, 1, go.
Between the time when chaos broke Cadia and the return of the sons of the Emperor, there was an age undreamed of. And unto this, Kronan, destined to bear the jeweled crown of Aquilonia upon a troubled brow. It is I, his chronicler, who alone can tell thee of his saga. Let me tell you of the days of high adventure. The Hunt for Red Orktober. Story continued from Kronan to Kunnin playlist. And so it was that Kronan, who had been dubbed the Kunnin One, now stood on the field of glory. A victory second to none, a duel that concluded with the besting of his arch-enemy and rival, Tooth Smasher. And with the death of old Toofy by his mighty hands, Kronan was now the de facto boss of all bosses on Aquilonia.
Mighty hands or mighty hand? One hand. The other one is destroyed, but one hand, yes.
Or almost. Yet there was some house cleaning to be done. Alas, Kronan was not really in a good position to get into these things right way. With the entire speed while looking on, Kronan's victory utterly complete. Only now did he fathom this. For the mighty Lord of Orcs went to raise his hands above his head, in the time-honored signal that he had indeed kicked the living crap out of his opposition. It was then that his hugely muscled right arm shot up as it was instructed. Alas, his left arm was naught but a bloody wreck hanging limply at his side. Not even the exuberance and augmented elan from his cataclysmic achievement was able to make the tattered wreck of a limb move as instructed. For Toofy had been no pushover. He had dished out some licks in the fight, all right. The most important one being the power maul smashing Kronan's left arm. A trade he made with vim and vigour, as it permitted Kronan to get inside Toofy's guard and end the matter.
Yeah, Truth Smasher was a real competitor for Kronan, and he tried his best, he fought his best, and it should be commended, you know, that he was such a great warboss of the Speed War. Even though, yes, his direction was not very orcish, you know, he was leaning on towards the Chaos Guards, so, you know, I'll forgive him for that. Even though he doesn't require my forgiveness, but I'll forgive him for that. Yeah. He was an okay warboss. But Kronan is the exception. He is the warboss. Yes.
Yet he was now utterly armless. Well, on one side. Now this could be a badge of honor to some, as Kronan had heard of a Humy lord who was named thus, Appledon the Armless, or something like that. Yet, for a truly orky orc, as Kronan most certainly was. In fact, it was...
When did Abaddon become armless? When did that happen to him? Was it during the Crusade, or was it during the Horus Heresy, or was it during his own chaos crusades across the galaxy? Yeah, I'm just wondering about when did that happen to him. Yeah.
It was uncontestable that he was indeed the most orky orc who had ever bestrode the sands of Aquilonia. So to have but one arm to crump humans with was a deficit that could not be permitted to continue. How would that be fair? If he put all of his fightiness and power into one arm, well, it would unbalance him for certain. But it would also make his opponents believe he was not taking them seriously. Using only one arm? Now that, as all good orcs know, was just taking the piss.
Well, if that's the case, then, you can get a robotic arm, or they can transplant an orc's arm onto Kronan, I think I've heard somewhere in one of the orc videos that I used to watch, the content for Warhammer 40k, it stated that, an orc can replace any part of their body with another part from another orc. If their heads were decapitated, it is possible to transfer that head that's been decapitated to another body, and somehow, some way it would work. So yeah, with body limbs, probably it's the same way.
It would give him an unnatural advantage, as his enemies would be too enraged, would make mistakes, and he wanted them at their best, all of them, but most especially the Cutsoders. For to meet and beat a Cutsoders was now his last goal, his overarching reason to live. Hence, as a sign to the adversaries he would face, it was only polite to meet them with both upper torso appendages in full working order. And that...
I agree, because you're going to need every ounce of energy, strength, and agility and abilities to fight against these guys, You can't come there handicapped or, a loss of one of your limbs. You will be defeated very fast.
That meant gaining a replacement. Alas, with the bedlam of the Squig War still going on all around him, it was not a particularly good time for decision-making. Now, to say that the Squig War was still in full swing was a bit of an exaggeration, if truth be told, and you know how we feel about truth in these chronicles. For Tiddles, Kronan's favourite pet, familiar, saviour and steed, in the last few days had more or less dominated the field.
Baldermort, why are you insulting Tiddles like this? Okay, his name is Tiddles. Come on, remember with me, Tiddles. Such a cute name.
He led his own mini-round, gnashy and bitey waaargh squigs to the arena, and they had engaged the loyalist squigs of Toofy's speed waaargh. It was a time of darkness, a squig on squig. No quarter was asked nor given. Well, apart from quartering one another, when too many squigs had tried to chomp on the same adversary and simply would not relent. In these situations, it was much akin to watching angry toddlers on PCP pulling at the same balloon. Fountains of blood would erupt as they did indeed quarter the fought-over squig repast, only for each to fall backwards with a chunk and the life-giving, very edible blood to be left in the centre. Good blood wasted in the sands, much to the dismay of the engaged squigs, who would then burst into tears at the waist before devouring the scraps they had gained and then moving on to the rest of the furore.
That's nasty. I know that the squigs and, this is what they'd probably do, but that's just disgusting. With the squigs, do they usually have one eye or multiple eyes? Because I can see the picture that is an example or a description of how Tiddles would look like, I'm assuming. It has like 6 eyes, if I'm not mistaken. And this squig has only one eye. So I'm just wondering, is this something that happens where there's a different variation of how many eyes a squig can have, or is there like a standard that a squig must have this set amount of eyes? Yeah, I just need to know about that.
And Tiddles was like unto a god of war. His the largest orb in the sands, biting and chomping on all before him. The last remnants of the beaten squigs of the speed waaargh being chased into pits and dark places, Tiddles, being the majestic beast he was, he did not continue in following the routed, but returned to his master's side. The huge blob of dental hatred now stood next to Kronan, basking in the reflected light of his master's approbation. Yet even he could tell that the Lord of Kunnin, despite his resplendent orkiness, was in fact very close to toppling over. Hence he lurked at his master's left arm, covering the obvious sign of frailty that could elicit further attacks. But he need not have been too concerned if that was in fact his want, for some who looked on thought he was sniffing the cunning one, not as a sign of affection, but possibly sizing up the chances for making a quick snap for the destroyed arm and then running off to consume it.
It's possible, but I don't think so. With Tiddles, I don't think he would ever try to hurt his best friend, Kronan. I don't think he would hurt him that way. Yeah.
But these were, of course, utterly baseless concerns. For Tiddles did indeed adore his master, as we have heard. Strange for so many to act out of racial character when involving Kronan, some might think. But then he is a protagonist. So, hence it can only be a truly heroic journey if there are one or two elements that ostensibly seem suspect, or even a little contrived. It's not called the Legend of Tiddles or Ducker von Smashhoven, is it? No, of course it's not, because that would be silly. Now, moving on. And so it was that Kronan was victor on the field, and when the Squig War was clearly over and it was time, the boys from the bleachers all dropped down to approach their new lord. They raised him onto their shoulders and paraded him around the arena for what seemed hours.
Kronan, 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 Kronan.
It was a little over 5 minutes in actuality, but seeing as this had been the longest any of them had done anything as fun, without there being gratuitous violence involved, it was a miracle of epic proportions that it lasted that long. And so it was that the Speed Waaargh was soon met by and embraced by the larger Waaargh, the cunning Waaargh, who had charged into the camp during the clash. The fact that a total victory had been gained was not theirs to know after all. And again, being completely candid, even when the Speed Waaargh marched out with Kronan atop them, even then it took a good hour and over 10,000 dead before the unification of the Waaarghs was confirmed.
1 hour, 10,000 dead. Orcs.
Of course, the fighting continued into the night, but it was on a much lesser scale. A new pecking order had to be gained after all. But where was Kronan during all of this? Simple. He was flat on his back. Taken to the grand hall that he had bashed into while barely able to stand, he was now escorted inside by the few bosses of the Speed Waaargh that had not beaten a hasty retreat when his star had risen on the sands of the arena. Of course, they were soon joined by Kronan's staunchest adherents, his bosses of the Kunnin Waaargh. They were all there, which was passing a little odd. Madnut Krunkelstein, Git Squisher McMurder, Ducker von Smashhoven, and even Grinner the Backstabber. Yet Kronan...
You should be dead.
And was barely able to talk at this point. The elation of the moment past, he was rather feeling the loss of blood from his arm. More orc bosses' faces swam into his vision as he sat on the huge chair, or thong, that had once been old Tooth Smashers. Faces that he would soon be able to attach names to in the days to come. There was Izap Newtone, the Big Mech, and Hypercrates, the Pain Boy, or Mad Doc, and his always friendly and cheerful grot aide, Len. A name that he would come to know intimately.
That's such a nice name, Len.
For it was Hypercrates' face that he would first see upon his waking. Some time later, I can assure you. For even the recovery abilities of the orc had their limits. Luckily for Kronan, these limits were not nearly surpassed by the operation that was performed on him before he passed out. For in his last breath, he had said 2 simple words: new arm. But of course, it would be sacrilegious of me to attempt to mimic the divine tones of the cunning one. So just take it from me, that is what he said.
New arm. Oh, okay, no. New arm. No, he wouldn't sound like that. New arm. It kind of sounds like the previous one. Okay, yeah. New arm, yeah. That's how he sounds like, yeah.
And so it was that Kronan awoke on a bed of surpassing opulence. For once, this four-poster had been the nightly recline for the humid lord of this region. Kronan was not impressed.
Because at first I thought that, the orcs made this, lavish and beautiful bed for their warboss. I was going to be surprised, because I just don't see the orcs doing something like that. I see them being very practical and very efficient. The bed was just going to be, a thick animal hide kind of blanket and, the pillow. I don't know what the pillow is going to be made out of, but not something luxurious like with silk or something, So yeah, now that I hear that it's actually from a former Humi leader, then it just makes sense, I guess.
The purple silken sheets were slippy and slidey, and in the hours to come, Kronan would also discern that they had a preponderance to stick to him and attempt to slide between his butt cheeks, never to be seen again without a repositioning and a hearty and regular yank.
Why are you sleeping naked? Just sleep with some briefs or something, and underwear or something. Why are you sleeping naked?
Kronan struggled with his discomfort as he witnessed the looming face of a mask-covered doc attempting to gain a reaction as he stabbed the arm attached to Kronan's left shoulder. The size was not quite as impressive, but it was as near a fit as could be gained, explained the doc. Well, he did after he pulled himself out of the ceiling and fell to the ground, for Kronan's instinctive reaction to the prodding had elicited a left uppercut of no mean effect. Once down and dusted off, a few teeth clattering to the floor to be collected by his assistant, Len, the pain boy head doc, explained that they had tried to gain a bicep-festooned appendage to equal his own. Alas, despite the many offers from his loyal knobs, the disparity in size was simply preclusive. So the only option had been to take one of the arms from his erstwhile rival, Tooth Smasher, and then sew it on. Kronan.
Oh, okay, you can do that too, yes. I think that will be good for Kronan. He will have a part of his former enemy, a part of him, and together, Tooth Smasher and Kronan, that kind of energy would just create something new, a new warboss. Yeah. So yeah, I'm all for it.
And looked down at his left arm. He nodded in approval. He knew that very soon his own growth would bring it up to spec, so to put it. But he did lament that he would have to put in some more work on this arm during his daily workouts, meaning he would have to hold a shield or smaller chopper in his right arm for a few weeks while performing his morning exercises.
And his morning exercises involves killing knobs or their bosses, The rule of 3. There must be at least 3 people left in a meeting that he is conducting. If there's too many orcs, he starts killing them off. He starts killing them off just to make sure there's at least 3 of them. So that's his exercise regime right there. Yeah, I see you, Kronan.
Of course, exercises meaning his morning slaughter of anyone he thought might have once thought or looked at him funny during the first hour before dawn. And, of course, he would have to remember this for when the rule of 3 was broken in any meeting. Again, meaning he would need to dish out a healthy beating for the infraction. But aside from the arm always moving to scratch his ass when he was not paying attention to it, things seemed to have turned out quite well. Now Kronan wished to almost immediately get back to work. He was the big boss of all of Aquilonia. He had things to do. Yet Hypercrates had refused his entreaties, being thrown objects, mostly with the left arm, of course, and enforced a period of a full day of rest upon him. Alas, the runty little doc would just put Happy Len in front of himself whenever Kronan looked like he was going to refute his authority again. And when Kronan looked into the eyes of this little imploring grot, he could not bring himself to do what was natural and squish him. Perhaps, in all of this, in all of the suffering and pain of his last days, after all of the benefit he had gained from grot kind, just perhaps, Kronan was beginning to appreciate them a little more than before.
No, he's still going to kill them. He's still going to use them for his thinkmas. He's still going to make groths atomy. I don't know, like the way he twists them into some sort of form or shape. He's still going to use them, okay? So no, he has no bit of respect or gratitude towards the groths. They're still his tools, his food. Yeah.
Or at least this would be the theme if he had been in any other fantasy setting. The reality of the matter was that little Happy Len had passed him his screen before making his plaintive big-eyed request for Kronan to stay put. And, thought Kronan, it had been entire days since he last gazed upon his secret treasure, the one item in all of the camp that was precious to him, yet worthless to all other orcs of the Waaargh. It was a data slate of the Humies, but somehow it responded, and it showed him the nicest of things. Things that really raised his spirits. For what others would call a vista of opportunity, this Kronan called his menu. For it catalogued the types, forms and functions of the many, many military organizations of the Humies. Much as he wished to just scroll to the end, his favorite ones, the gold ones. He tantalized himself with the myriad of types he would have to progress through, would have to collect before he could unlock the gold ones. You
have to work for it, Kronan. You have to work for them to take an interest in you. The galaxy is a big place with a lot of dangers, even some dangers that are far more powerful than you, and those require the attention of the Cuts Orders. Okay? So if you want them to have an interest in you, you have to be big on Aquilonia. You have to be very big.
Humies were intensely silly, you see. It was a wonder they had managed to keep control for so long with such strange and slapstick armies. For some reason, the blisters of battle, the small marines with the white hair and the pointy noses, named their tribes after smells. Humies were odd indeed.
The blisters are... Oh my gosh, okay. Orcs.
There was the odour of the pungent shroud, the odour of the booty pose, the odour of the even malice. Thus they went on to the odour of our farted laddie, the scary hose, and the odour of the valueless pert. But, reasoned Kronan, as he moved on to the anal mini-tantrum regiments, they were no better. To be fair, their naming convention seemed more on the nose, less oblique or flowery. There were the I'ma get some squeal legion.
I like that. I'ma get some. Ah, that is so cool. That one is so cool.
Aptly named, as Kronan did remember the great Gazgul himself mentioning that they did indeed squeal. The Claudian regiment, who never sat down, ever. An odd...
Cadia stands. The Claudia. Okay. Yeah, it doesn't really suit them, but it's so funny, Claudia. Oh gosh. Claudia stands. But nothing will beat Armageddon, I think.
Thing to brag about, really, but the Humies were all a bit odd. On to the Catifan regiment. Despite the name, they looked quite bulky, tough. Kronan was looking forward to fighting them. The piss-riven Fistborn. They had impressive hair squigs stuck to their faces, yet Kronan could not help but note the size of their hats. They would be Kunnin. Fighting them would be tricky, but ultimately very rewarding. On to the tall-armed desert raiders, though whose afters they stole was anyone's guess. Eldar, perhaps? Then the Vilehailer regiment, who had suspiciously long coats. Kronan suspected that they may not have had much on under those coats and shuddered.
You know what? It's possible. It is possible.
Lastly, there was the breathcore of Craig. Sidebar. Now one might think that dental concerns would be rife in an orc camp, but this could not be further from the truth, for the gobsquigs were abundant and hungry. Hence, orthodontists and dental hygienists were nary required. Sidebar over. Kronan suspected this would not be the same for the breathcore of Craig. He shrugged. It was unlikely their halitosis would be effective over the ripe smells of blood. But he did not get to the arse-starters or the prim-anus knobs. Never made it to his dazzling cuts odors.
Arse-starters.
For this was when Kronan slowly slipped into the land of dreams, clutching a manifesto, his prized menu, the promise of the battles to come, and he slept the sleep of the just. Waking was a pleasure. Well, it was when he had pulled the damn sheets out of his bottom, for despite the uncomfortable resting place, he was rising to a new world. His world. Or at least, it was going to be. Kronan bounced out of bed, landing with a dramatic thump that sent many a file and bubbling liquid container on the tables around him clattering to the floor. The crescendo was matched by the doors to his bedroom opening wide, and his bosses standing there in attendance, waiting for their lord to command them. Kronan strode out and walked the lines, nodding to those who he knew, stopping at those he did not. For his war had practically doubled this night, as the cunning and speed wars were now one. Yet there was much to be done, and as Kronan came to the final boss, Grinner the backstabber of the freebooters, he again stopped.
Kill him, Kronan, he betrayed you.
The huge mega-armored orc was still smaller than Kronan, and held his head low, for only the two of them knew the secret. For it had been Grinner that had betrayed him, had led him into the trap against Tooth Smasher, and then turned on him. Yet Kronan did not forget the realizations he had gained during his time in the Speed Wars camp, the plummeting acknowledgement that he had indeed contributed mightily to the creation of the Speed War. He had done this by rejecting knobs, mobs, and bosses he did not think he could use at the time. But now, with this fact still front and center in his mind, and with his many plans to come requiring an overwhelming amount of boys, well, Grinner was what he was. He wanted to serve the biggest, meanest orc, and he had made an error. He had bet against a cunning one. In silence, Kronan glared at the freebooter with his strange hats and daft Penelope of war. He so wanted to just crush him there and then. But after a few more seconds, a large snort that made Grinner seem to shiver, Kronan briskly nodded and moved on. He would keep his eye on Grinner, but he now seemed to know his place.
Keep your enemies close, Kronan. Keep your enemies close.
And even Grinner would not sell out to any non-orc. So as Kronan was the only big boss now in the running, he instinctively knew that Grinner simply had no choice but to remain loyal. Certainly, if he wished to partake in the carnage that would surely issue from Kronan's escapades. And no orc in their right mind would want to avoid a war of the magnitude that was presently formed, a 1 in a million years opportunity. Yet there were loose ends to deal with. Kronan would hear the counsel of his knobs and bosses before he moved. Hence, he called a big boss bash. It was to be tonight. And as his proclamation went out into the camp, Kronan could not help but remember when he was summoned, when he went to his first and only big boss bash. And now they did it at his word. The bosses of all of Aquilonia would sit at his feet, would listen to his words, just as he had done with the prophet of the gods.
And there must be hundreds of thousands of them, maybe even millions, all coming to this gathering just to hear what Kronan has to say after he's Thinking.
And his heart and chest swelled as he watched the preparation. And there would be no need for him to bring his best leadership to the bash. He would not use weasel or wimpy words. Hence, they had to be divinely inspired. He would require to commune with his benefactor. For he was now under no illusion. He was indeed a gleeful and ardent adherent of Mork, god of brutal Kunnin. He was as orky as any orc could dream of being. He was as violent as any worshipper of Gork, which was the majority of orcs, to be honest. Yet it was Mork's power that had gotten him this far, had blessed him with all that he had, and he would not forget it. Hence, to prove he was who he claimed, that he still had what it took, that the heady power of a combined waaargh had not spoiled and removed him from his roots, his inner goal, his truth. It was that very morning that he went through the camp with his hand-picked guard, his utter and total Black Legion, and he went to a place where all could spectate, all of his people could watch, as he did that which they could not.
I wonder, were they silent? As they see the Warboss going to the stage. I don't know if it's like a stage or something where everyone can see the Warboss, or were they just a rowdy, loud bunch of orcs? Yeah, not really taking interest in what the Warboss is doing. Doing these ceremonies for thinking. I'm just wondering whether they were actively loud and just doing crazy stuff, or were they silent and disciplined. Yeah.
That which no other would dare. He went to perform a mighty cogitation, a bout of unadulterated, undiluted thinking. The Speed Waaargh had not witnessed the splendour of this act, but they were soon informed by the members of the Cunning Waaargh that a wide berth should be given in order to avoid the head-exploding powers that Kronan would be summoning and mastering to his very will. And by Mork they listened. For was he not the Cunning one? Had he not already done that which was impossible? He had defeated the Humies in open battle. He had slain Adipi Arstatters and taken their transports, had raised city after Humie city in his rampage across Aquilonia. Even in the darkest of times, when any other orc would be beaten or quit, he had prevailed. None now refuted his power.
The orc of our times. He is the orc of our times.
His right to rule. Yet he could not call himself the lord of all orcs on Aquilonia. Not yet. And this is what he would cogitate on. This is what he would direct his awe-inspiring mental acuity toward. He would think about how to capture that runt Tober, the traitor.
Capture? I thought you want to kill him. Why are you capturing him? No, Kronan, don't capture. You must expunge this thing, this abomination, this unorkiness out of existence. You cannot allow it to breathe the same air that you wish to rule, Aquilonia. You can't allow it.
The unorky filth, who had not only turned to lesser gods, but even managed to lead his entire tribe into the worship of the weedy, humid deities. Pathetic. And so it was that he strode back to the arena, and it began. Each moment of his stint was punctuated by the firing of a thinking grot at the walls of the arena. Okay, some missed the walls, even sailed over the bleachers toward the sun. Yet it was of no moment. The combined squealing of the thinking grots, in their lovely new robes, which some desolate runtherd had stitched while fretting over the fate of the Cunning one, had reached the pinnacle. And Kronan began to think. He knew that Tober had used some arcane power to tear a hole in reality. He had led his red orcs into it, but had they gone far? Kronan could not believe that the slack-jawed maggot Tober had the mystic oomph to go off-planet. for Kronan fathomed that if he were spiritually well endowed enough to do that, surely he would have just unleashed his power and taken command himself. And the worms of power that had been seen on Tober, despite being red, corrupting, disgusting, had never been larger than those he had witnessed on the head of Madnut Krunkelstein. Ergo, which is not something he would have said, because nobody but the most effete fop does anymore. He did not think Tober had the chops to escape Aquilonia. All he needed to do was find him. But he would have to do so swiftly. There was so much to be done. And Kronan knew, with as much certainty as an Eldar does when he looks at his last can of body and curl enriching hairspray, that he
What? Baldermort. Oh my gosh.
would be getting more. Kronan knew with that level of certainty that if he left Tober to his own devices, it would not bode well. Hence, he directed his mind to that most important quest. His own holy crusade, the hunt for Red Orktober. The crowds watched in utter silence. Well, some were enjoying the resounding echoes of the thinking grots and their subsequent splattering, but it was pretty quiet for so many orcs in one place. For they were in awe. He was doing it. He was thinking.
Brain power rules, Kronan. Brain power rules. Keep on doing it.
Kronan deliberated, and then he rose. From that moment on, anyone who was of a mind to take a wager suddenly knew that it would be foolhardy or incompetent to bet on red. Kronan's face said it all. He had found the solutions. He was ready. And so it was that Kronan held his bash, spoke to his bosses, gave them their marching orders, quite literally. First, Gitsquisher McMurder would go to the ancestral homes of Tober's tribe. He would go in force, but was not to engage. A frown and many raised eyebrows across the gathering followed. Well, those who had miniature hair squigs above their eyes anyway, as orcs have no eyebrows. But there was some mild shock, is the meaning of it all. Kronan instructed Madnut Krunkelstein to commune with Gork and Mork and attempt to use magic to locate the foe, as surely Tober was a foe of the gods as much, if not more so, than Kronan and his waaargh. Dakar von Smashhoven was to take his winds of waaargh and cover as much land as possible. Again, ordered to locate, not defeat. Though it was firmly hinted at by Kronan's wink at his right-hand man that a few bombs and strafing runs would not breach this diktat. If they were humies, the prodded ribs and sly smiles would have intimated something along the lines of Ducker being teacher's pet.
No. He is just an extremely loyal orc, unlike some of the bosses out here.
All knew he had earned it, for none but Tiddles had laboured longer or harder to free Kronan, and none but Kronan knew of the Herculean efforts performed by Tiddles. Hence, Ducker was definitely viewed as Kronan's go-to guy. Hypocrates was ordered to prepare to test all who were wounded by the Red Orcs for signs of contamination, and Isaac Newtone was tasked with a very special role indeed, one that Kronan was to discuss with him in private after the bash. Grinner was given busy work, sending him off up into the northern wastes to check for the scum, but all knew that that was all too unlikely, as that would be the first place they would all check, and Kronan knew that Tober would know that he knew it. Hence, he would be an idiot to do this. Not outside the bounds of reality, as Tober had turned from the true gods to worship the wimpy. Yet Kronan believed, despite this, he was not a complete grot-licker. The orders given, the camp exploded into activity, and the many bosses went on their merry way, eager for the fray to come. Kronan sat back and waited for the next few days, for he knew his time had come. And during those days, he went amongst his people, the many mobs, tribes and cultures, and he forged bonds with all. He was the cunning one after all, and no longer intended to fight it. Instead of cursing the unsolicited ideas he now had assailing him on the regular, he was instead basking in it.
This is interesting. I like the fact that he is going amongst his orc or orcish people, trying to understand each and every single clan or group of orcs. Because that's going to be invaluable for him in future battles to come, where he will need a specific group that can do a specific thing, and he has good communications with them. They understand the Warboss understands them and their abilities, and it's just going to make the leadership of this this cunning war that much more easier for Kronan, because he's one with the people as well.
He would throw himself open to the inspiration and guidance of Mork, and so he collected a group of handy grots who were tasked with the writing of every single idea he had. Now, when he perused his notes at the end of each day, he realized that some inspiration was of more worth than others. Also, that some grots were of more use than others. When notes had been taken poorly, he would have that grot reclassified and repurposed as a thinking grot for his next cogitation. Yet, even when the notes were inarguably correct, he knew that not everything that came into his head was of worth. Perhaps this was another test, a whole new level of challenge set upon him by his master, Mork. For he would now have to struggle to discern that which was worth keeping. For instance, it was hypothetically effective and potentially efficient to have the mechs make ice cream guns, for he knew that many of the Humies were corpulent, and it would create a very real distraction for them if used in battle.
Ice cream guns? What about the guns that create those bubbles? That one would be effective, but ice cream? Okay.
By the size of some of them, any whiff of dessert, and they would drop trowels or lasguns and dive on it. Was not one of their own regiments pretty much specialized in stealing desserts? Yet, on reflection, it was not that good of an idea after all, because the round Humies rarely put up much of a fight anyway. Nor would the Grox cannon be effective in hindsight, for Grox were plentiful, but they were upkept by the Humies. When they were gone, the Grox would soon follow. And in reality, he had the idea while looking at a rocket truck squig buggy. He had been a plagiarist, a copycat, whatever that was. So he just ate the grot and note together to save face. Ideas had so much variety in their actual utility, it was baffling. Not that Kronan would have put it that way, of course, because baffling is a rather poxy word. But in any case, Kronan was now king of his world, leader of his people, and he got to know each group as well as any could. Of course, he always had the rule of 3 to use if things got tedious.
Oh no.
A rule that had not been disseminated to the Speedwar by his own boys. The hilarity of Kronan crumping entire delegations of kiss-asses before they realized the rule was an almost endless wellspring of mirth for his original followers. But after less than 80 casualties, even the most prolific butt-kissers and boss-botherers now gave Kronan a wide berth, unless he approached them, of course. Yet it was not long before his orders had brought results. Git Squisham and Murder confirmed that Tober had not returned to his old turf. Kunnin the Backstabber soon reported that the big red idiot had not been seen in the north. Of course, Kronan told him to double and triple check the caves, as that equated to about 2,000 miles of mountainside. He knew Grinner would not be back any time soon, at least until summoned. But it was Daka and Madnut who brought home the goods. Of course. Who else?
Who else? Who else but those who you trust the most?
Daka von Smashhoven had been in the cockpit endlessly, flying as far as his tanks would take him, then returning and just jumping back into his second or third flyer, and off he went again. He was
a hard worker, a loyal friend. Huh. You don't get them like him anymore in the orcs.
Orc possessed. Odd, but nobody would question his orkiness. Well, a few did, but they were even less tasty than they were stupid, so Ducker let them off with losing just one limb. And Ducker had some dire findings indeed. For Tober was not the coward that everyone had suspected. Far from it. He had instead been cunning. Troubling indeed. For Tober had not gotten far with his magical door, landing back on Aquilonia only a few hundred miles away. From there, his progress was easy to follow. Tober and his warband had been blazing a trail across Aquilonia's southern continent. Each Hume city or settlement he had encountered, he had razed. Yet he had taken the time to not consume the Humes. Well, not all of them.
I'm just wondering, how many humans are on Aquilonia? Is it billions? Is it millions? Or hundreds of thousands of human beings? Or, is it like a high population of Humes? Because Kronan has been destroying one settlement after the next, of Hume towns or villages or major cities. He's been destroying them. And now Orktober is doing the same thing, burning down, razing cities and settlements across, I think, the southern continent, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, I'm just wondering, how many humans live on Aquilonia?
And his warband had taken to arranging them in odd patterns on the ground. At first, Kronan was not sure of what to make of it all, until he went up with Daka as a passenger and witnessed the spectacle with his own eyes. It was all too familiar. As they flew over the lands and saw the stacks of Hume dead, often just their noggin had been taken and piled up, sometimes stripped entirely, so that most were mere skulls. Yet Kronan recognized the patterns. They were the same as those left in the Speedwar's wake in the days before their battle. Here they had arranged grots in these strange, pointless patterns. Now they were doing it to the Humes in vast numbers. Of course, the largest Hume hardpoints had been ignored, circumvented, but Tober had done for hundreds of thousands of Humes by this point, and the shapes on the landscape now reminded Kronan of the sigils carved into the staff of Tober. He wanted to vomit, and so he did. Okay, the tile waved.
Wait, he's vomiting where? He is vomiting where? Kronan.
A wave of expelled green puke covered the entire windscreen and caused Daka to say some very disloyal things. But when he had righted the flyer and wiped away enough to pilot them home, he apologized to Kronan, who thought nothing of it, of course.
Kronan is supposed to be the one apologizing. Yuck.
Daka could do no wrong. Well, he probably could, but he hadn't done it yet. Without anyone there to witness the chiding and swearing, Kronan did not see as an issue that needed to be addressed. Now, Madnat had not been as useful at start, but with his new information, with the sigils and markings, Kronan consulted with him and took him deep into his counsel, whatever that means. The two walked away from the camp, with only Kronan's 1,000 guard of mega knobs, his utter, black legion, and Madnat brought some of his mentalists with him. They processed to a place of safety, of security. Then the weird boy began his rite. The lines of power that worked around his body were a good orky green. Then they slowly lifted into the air and formed what looked like a massive foot. Now Kronan was used to Madnat using his great feet of Gork to crush his enemies. Now he witnessed a new miracle. For the foot did not stamp down onto the ground. It did come down, but gentle, landing but one pinky toe onto the sand before the two orc bosses. And it was the nail of the pinky toe that then seemed to swirl, a mist formed within it. Madnat Krunkelstein then began a really annoying throat-singing chant, that drove Kronan to have to restrain his left hand from snapping out and strangling the weird boy.
Oh gosh, I want to hear this. You know, I want to hear the weird boys singing here, or the boss of the weird boys. Yeah.
But Kronan managed it, hands now clenched together so as not to interrupt Madnut with a knockout blow. He looked into the glowing toenail as images began to form. And there they were. The vision travelling across the plains of Aquilonia as the throat singing continued, and at last their end came. For the illusion showed the camp of Tober. It could be nowhere else. For there were red orcs aplenty, far more in fact than Kronan had ever believed. But then he had to concede that he was hardly attempting to count them when he was stuck to the tree of Woohoo not so long ago. Now they were not enough to even give his mighty war paws, but they were enough for a decent scrap. Even so, as the toenail showed them the camp, Kronan could see what had become of these poor wretches. For most of them were mutated and twisted, engorged and augmented by the power of some horrific force.
Nasty.
Most were red, larger than normal orcs, and definitely more spiky, toothy and gnashy. Some of their weapons seemed to drip humy red blood or gore. Then there were the normal green orcs, but they were not normal at all. Most were bloated and disfigured, and looked like a stiff breeze would strip the skin from their frames.
Oh no, Nurgle? Those are orcs that worship Nurgle? Oh gosh.
Yucky. The last were the ones with multiple eyes and strange fires burning on their skins, or when they coughed, which they did a lot. Kronan did not wish to witness what the purple-skinned ones were doing to each other.
Slaneshi worshipping orcs? What?
It seemed to be some form of wrestling, but they never seemed to let go of each other, perpetually repeating the same moves, and when locked on top of each other, they did not stop or change.
Stop! Stop right there. Stop. Oh my gosh. No. Don't think about it. Don't imagine it in your mind. Just erase.
Continued their wrestling thrusts. Odd in the extreme, and Kronan was forced to hold his gorge. But after the event of the cockpit of Docker's plane, he put in far more effort, and did not disgorge his stomach's contents onto the spectral toenail and foot in front of him. Despite how much he wanted to wash his eyes and forget he had ever witnessed these things, still he stood and glared at the toenail. He had to be certain. They all did. Thus it was that he waited until he saw the vision finally stop inside the tent of Tober himself. He was there, in the camp. Confirmation received. The toenail now seemed to pull the vision back, so that it returned to the place where they now stood. And Kronan concentrated on the vision as hard as he had ever concentrated on anything in his life. For at its end, due to his diligence, he now knew in exactly what direction and exactly what range Tober's camp was. It was time for the end game. Despite the visions now clearing, Madnut still performed his swaying and eyes-closed throat singing. So
I think you can stop now. I think you can stop singing now.
Kronan permitted his left arm to finally take action, and it punched Madnut in the throat. Kronan just leaned back slightly, so it only hit a bit, instead of taking Konkelstein's head off. A lot of coughing, gasping, and rolling around on the floor occurred, of course, but Madnut saw the efficacy of the action, and did not bemoan the curtailing of his mystic chant, now that it had been confirmed as successful.
Because you know, if you bemoan about this situation, Kronan is going to kill you. He will kill you. I can assure you of that.
They had found that little turd Tober. On the dawn of the third day, as Tober came out of his tent, he looked to the north. And it took every ounce of his self-control to not hardly step back inside. for what he saw was his doom.
And for sure they were having like war horns, you know. Do, 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 do. Yeah, something like that.
Now Tober, being a twit big enough to turn his back on the only truly powerful beings in the universe, Gork and Mork, was an insufferable know-it-all and egotist. For no other reason could there be for his next actions. He looked and saw the lines of orcs, good proper green orky orcs, crest the hillside with the first light. He knew that the cunning and speed waaarghs were both here, that his enemy, Kronan de Kunnin, was here.
And they are no longer cunning and speed war, they are now a cunning war. They've united. They are one force with one purpose, one vision, to be led by their leader Kronan, the Kunnin Warboss.
And yet, he did not run. He did not try to hide. Well, he'd been doing that for over a week or two, and it had obviously been in vain. Nor did he organize his boys into a defensive position, despite the odds. No. Tober strode out, and before all of his camp, he bellowed his thanks to the Red God, the Blood God. He shouted a thanks to Khorne. And with that, his boys all jumped to attention, dragged themselves off each other and out of their tents, out of their holes and huddles, or the bogs of filth that they had been resting in, and began to form up.
Form up. 2 lines up front, 4 lines behind. Come on, form up.
Tober would march out to meet the Cunning One. He would march out to fight Kronan personally. And as the camp sprang to life, the Cunning waaargh watched on.
I never took you for a fighter, October. Okay.
But as they saw that the scum were not fleeing, when they marched out and raised their 4 icky banners, the entire waaargh gave a unified holler of pure, undiluted happiness. The hunting had ended, and the enemy would fight.
At least they still keep that part of themselves as true orcs, you know? They're not running away, they're standing and they're getting ready to fight. Yeah.
Kronan sat in the Kunnin-mobile, looked down at the spectacle, his main bosses around him. He smiled his widest, toothiest, most gleeful grin as he looked at each and each one nodded back, and then to each other.
I like how Tiddle's image is also incorporated into his leadership structure. You know, he has these 6 bosses, and then he also has Tiddle right there as a valued member of his cabinet. Yeah.
Never had there been such a collection of teeth on rapturous display. Certainly not since Kronan had the Bad Moons hand over all the teeth that they had extorted from the waaargh. Even so, each one was now nodding so fast, it seemed that they would unhinge their heads. It was when it was a fever pitch that Kronan stood and raised his mighty chopper high. Stood on the Kunnin-mobile, he was, all could see him. And he shouted his joy to the skies, to his guards. And with that, the entire waaargh began to charge down the hillside at the waiting ranks of traitorous twisted scum. The collected firepower of the artillery then fired over the lip of the hill, and 100 plumes of fire and smoke streaked towards the massed enemy. Above this barrage, high in the skies, Ducker von Smashoven and his winds of waaargh flew.
Wow!
Raining explosions down on the vile chaos scum. But it was not the center they punished, but the edges of the chaos orc formations. Well, mostly. For it is rare that any plan, no matter how many crumpings were threatened if not performed correctly, to survive contact with the enemy. In this case, meaning that the winds of waaargh were simply enjoying themselves so much that their boundless enthusiasm meant that they could not curtail their bombings to just the fringes. But in any case, the vast majority of the assault hit the sides and rear of the enemy, as intended.
Good job, boys.
The left flank. Gitsquisher McMurder, realizing he had not taken much part in the saga so far, knew it was now his time to shine. For verily, there were gits to squish in abundance. A target-rich environment indeed. As instructed, he took the vast majority of the snake bites and their snogger riders and did as he was told. Well, again, sort of. He was not on a squig himself, but, as a mighty cyborg, his metallic leg pistons pumped like never before. His pair of chain choppers roared as he led the charge down the flank, keeping up with all of the snoggers. In front of him were the weirdos who had become almost moving sacks of green bile. At least in a distance, they still seemed to be orky, for they were green enough, all right.
No, their type of green is a different type of green. You know, it's not like orcish green. This is like sickly green. Ugh, yuck.
Yet when the snoggers charged, the putrescence of the disloyal orcs created a miasma around them. A fog that the snoggers would not penetrate under any circumstance. With his cavalry screeching to a halt or rushing off to the sides, wheeling to avoid the yuckiness.
Okay, we need Darker van Smershoven's air wing to destroy the Nurgle orcs, you know. They need to be destroyed by air power or by something else. You can't be going to, you know, close quarter combat with these guys. No ways. I would actually, but then I'm not an orc. Then if I run away, I'm not a true orc. I have to fight them. Gosh. I feel sorry for the orcs who must fight against these guys. Yeah.
Gitsquisher had a vast plethora of reactions he could have instituted. He could fall back and wait for his ground forces to catch up. He could swing around the rear and avoid the smelly orcs to hit the main body of red orcs in the rear. He could hold position and force the scum to come to him, while signalling his issues to high command aboard the Kunnin mobile. Yet, when all was said and done, Gitsquisher could not resist. He knew that a balk now would affect the elan of his following boys, might put them off, and with these horrific blasphemies advancing, they might be able to envelop the central van of the cunning war, which would spell certain doom for Kronan. So he did the only thing he felt would honor the gods. He spat at the snoggers and continued his charge alone.
Oh, alone. Good luck. You're gonna need it.
The chaos-worshipping pus-filled orcs of the grandfather Nurgle stood and laughed at him.
And you can imagine, that laughter is not like ha ha ha. No, it's like you know, because they have all that gunk and all that nonsense inside their throats and I could never face against Nurgle worshipping, you know, people. I just can't. I can't.
They had little squig-like things all around them as Gitsquisher took his last few paces toward the lines of the scum. Their eyes began to widen, their formation buckling, their courage melting. Gitsquisher was a legend of murder, hence his name, of course. One he had spent many years building up, with a veritable cornucopia of slaughtered foes. Yet,
is Kronan coming to back him up?
Even he did not believe he had the rep to make an entire square of hundreds of orcs show any sign of fear. Yet, he was busy. It was best not to divide one's attention just before hitting the enemy. And so it was that Gitsquisher McMurder plied his trade. His last few paces were punctuated by a mighty leap as he shot into the air and avoided the majority of the close-range weapon fire. After all, even his mega armor and cyborg frame was not invulnerable. McMurder landed amongst the enemy and slew a half-dozen in the first second. With each pace, he kicked a horde of the little squig things into the air, or stamped on piles of them as he advanced. They now seemed to be withdrawing from his rage, and clearing the scene for his chopper work amongst the Chaos Orcs. Now he did find that it took a lot more willy than usual to fully finish off these twisted horrors.
It's because they're filled with all that pus and just gunkiness inside them. That's why it's difficult just to cut them down easily. These things are rotten. They are fermented. They are decomposing. Everything at the same time. It's just nastiness. So yeah, good luck. Ugh.
But he was certainly up to the challenge. Yet, after only a half-minute of truly R-rated levels of violence, with bits and pieces flying from his zone, like he was a wood chipper being fed a mix of cadavers and bags of vomit, his momentum was faltering. They were closing ranks around him, ready to simply dive on him and drag him down. It was then that he found out the reason that the Chaos Orcs had near broke, for he was soon joined by something truly amazing. The Beast Snoggers. And they hit like a juggernaut filled with really heavy ball bearings. It was like every brick privy in the universe had grown legs and charged.
Who's commanding them?
A clumsy metaphor perhaps, but no exaggeration. Yet he did not have long to realize the cause of the change of heart in the Snoggers. Not their riders, mind you, for they were all bloody eager for the fight, yucky or not. And there he was, somehow engorged, covered in a green light that made him seem to be twice or thrice his size, teeth like choppers, a maw as large as a squigoth attached to a ball with tiny legs.
Tiddles!
It was Tiddles. He had roused literally thousands of his kind, and, passing odd, he had led his kind, the humble squigs, to not only attack the fleeing Snoggers so violently that they were forced into charging the Chaos Orcs just to avoid their rampage, but when this was done, the squigs had picked up their pace and moved amongst them to hit the Chaos lines at the same time. Tiddle was wading through the Chaos scum, biting all around, but then spitting out their limbs or torsos into the
Good. Spit them out. Don't swallow them. Especially the ones made from, the ones who worship Nurgle. Don't. Not that. Yuck.
next ranks. His glow seemed to empower him, for he was indeed much larger than usual. It was only when Tiddles had advanced so far forward that he had caught up with Gitsquisher McMurder that said Mork Warboss could see the three weird boys sewn to Tiddles' posterior. Each had a head that was distended and had perpetual green worms of power cascading out of it and into the avatar of Squig Rage.
What? What? Three weird boys' heads have been sewn onto Tiddles' posterior, and, they're imbuing him with power? Wow. Okay.
Tiddles had saved the left flank assault, and now he was supporting Gitsquisher, so the Lord of Murder could get really stuck in. For his one job had been given by the Kunnin one. Squisher was to squish the leader of this warband, and McMurder was making good progress toward the banner at the phalanx's center. The right flank. The trucks had been mustered on the right flank. Thousands of engines roared as one, and a cloud of smoke was billowing from their dirty and loud engines as they tore towards the nasty, weird Chaos Orc lines. Even as they drew on, some of the horrific purple orcs were still wrestling with each other, weirdos. They only stopped as the final mile was being eaten fast. The Speedwar made up the vast majority of the right flank. Boomdaka snazwagons, scrapjets, dragstars, war buggies, and every other type of fast-moving vehicle screeched to the far right, past the trucks heading directly at the center of the enemy lines.
I like how, from my past reactions to the other videos in the Kronan of Aquilonia playlist are being incorporated into this war. All the different units, all the different factions of the Orc war, they're all being incorporated into this battle. And yeah, I like that. I like how Baldermort's Guide to Warhammer has done that. Yeah, it's cool.
They thought that they would easily encircle the foe, but it was then that a tidal wave of loping beasts came out, some ridden by orcs, most by very pale female humies, with pointy teeth and strange clawed hands. Odd for humies, odder that they were fighting alongside these orcs. But a fight was a fight, and most did not do more than raise a cough or chortle at the variety that was on display in this epic scrap. Leading the front ranks was Grinner. He had command of the nicest of battle wagons. Alas, it was surpassed in near every way by Kronan's brand new welcome home gift from Zap Newtone, his Kunnin mobile. But Grinner was used to playing second fiddle. So it was that the fastest elements were met in a horrific pitched battle of dust and screaming, bombs going off everywhere. It was dazzlingly fast, and there were no lines, no centre sections to the far right flank. The bikers would rip apart fleeing pink rider or beast, only to be jumped on at another angle by one of the Chaos scum. Confusing did not even come close. Yet, in this instant, it was what the orcs were made to do. For it mattered little to any of them what was happening around the battlefield. All that mattered was the explosions raining down on them from Smashhoven and his flyboys, the enemy in front of them, the enemy to their side.
It's a party. It is a party for the orcs. They're enjoying this party.
And the orcs were having a whale of a time. None could tell how the far flank was actually doing, but nor did Grinner the backstabber really care either, for he was about to go in. The horror began as soon as they were a few hundred meters from the Chaos Orc lines. Wheels disappeared from trucks, leaving them to skid across the sands of Aquilonia and then stop. Flames tore out at them, changing everything that they touched. Metal, rubber, flesh. All was corrupted and turned into mind-bending and eye-crossingly colourful squalls of light and flesh. The charging wagons were halted as they ploughed into the front ranks of wheelless trucks. The entire advance stalled.
This must be Tzeentch's orcs, those who worship Tzeentch. Okay.
But Grinner had no concerns. It was a bit of a laugh watching the entire force splattering, yet, deep down, Grinner was an orky orc. And he then did as he was instructed to do by the Kunnin one. He had crossed Kronan once. He knew that he could not survive a second infraction. Hence, he instituted the plan.
I still don't trust him, though. Even though he may know that he can't afford to betray Kronan a second time, I just don't trust him. Any opportunity that prevails itself to him, he will probably take it. Like, there's an 80% chance of that happening. So, yeah, I still think that Kronan should have ended him, the moment he got better and he was, amongst his bosses. He should have killed him there, but okay.
The truck's now a huge pile-up. The boys inside were pouring out, but had to take cover behind their wrecks as the changing flames were spewing out at them. Grinner made his way down the line, laughing as he did, encouraging the boys who were a bit short in the tooth, rousing those who were frustrated by the breakdown in their charge. He wandered until he found the section he needed, and inside 3 ruined trucks he found his quarry. Shaking and jabbering, the insane weird boys were pleading to be allowed to escape. Grinner took his best flash kits, and each one grabbed a weird boy in the crook of their left arm, grabbing their necks with the right arm, as they had been shown by none other than Kronan himself. Sidebar. For reference, please see Gretchen, Runtherds and Killer Cans. Sidebar over. Each heavily armoured orc then took position, as Grinner then barged his way through the crashed and smashed truck labyrinth. As near as one as can be expected of any orcs, the flash kits smashed through the last wreckage, and each hefted their weird boys and pulled on their necks, cocking them, as Kronan had shown them. With that, they were pointed at the front ranks of the Chaos Orc lines, and each fired a huge wave of green orky waaargh energies. The effect was simple, but dramatic. The first few shots slammed into a pink and blue shield, lighting up in a huge dome over the orcs, which had gone a long way to protecting them from the presence dropped by the winds of waaargh. but under the sustained wave of green wire energies, the shields cracked, and the bolts now impacted on the enemy. Many were thrown backwards into their own lines, smashing them all to pulp. Some were launched into the air or simply burst under the pressure. But either way, the spectral warping fires now stopped issuing from the Chaos lines, and with that, a huge bellow from Grinner was matched by all of the boys who had survived the crashes. And thousands of them now poured over the wreckage and ploughed into the Chaos army. Dagger like a river was flowing from the Chaos scum, but it did nothing but take out the first few ranks of the orcs. The greenskins filled with righteous wrath would simply not fall over easily. And when they hit, the wrestling orcs, the weedy blue ones, their strange pets, their spells and magics, all were being stomped flat. This was fine chopper work, but the Flashkits and Grinner the Backstabber did not hold their fire with the weird boys. Okay, a good half of them had exploded under the pressure and taken out a full score of orcs and their wielders. But all of the best weapons get hot, don't you know? Or something like that. Hence the right flank was a mess of carnage, speed, spells and blasts. Well, it was until it started to rain bubbles.
Oh, yes.
The Speedwire's extreme right flank peeled off as the plan came into effect.
One of the best weapons the orcs have ever made. Really. You know, the smaller the bubble, the deadlier it is. The bigger the bubble, the less deadlier it is. But it's still effective. And it's beautiful. It's mesmerizing, you know. You'd be distracted by seeing all these bubbles slowly but surely coming down to the surface. And then, boom!
Now, this was not really due to any instructions, or wish to stop fighting, of course, as nothing could be further from the truth. Yet the Speedwire were far more happy to come back and finish the job when the immediate danger had passed. For it really was raining bubbles. For in the confusion of the advance, the War had moved up their mick guns, and bubble chuckers especially. The creatures of Slaanesh were now mesmerized by the prettiness of the scene. As they took a few seconds to recoup from their battle with the orcs, all looked up, and the beasts and snappy women of Slaanesh could do nothing but curse their love of the pleasurable sight. Well, they did until the slowly dropping balls covered them. Like a nude swimmer looking up to see a mile-wide wall of man-o'-war jellyfish coming down to encase their knackers.
A nude swimmer? In a sea of jellyfish? No, man, no. Oh, that would be terrible. You can't even scream.
The Slaaneshi demons suddenly fathomed their doom, yet could not escape. Orcs in front of them, orcs to their sides, duckers carpet bombing behind them. They could do nothing but watch as the bubbles came down and burst amongst them.
And you know, they're coming down slowly. They're not rushing. The bubbles are not rushing. They're just coming down gently. But then on the surface, you know, the orcs are in panic mode. Everybody's running everywhere, but they can't run away because they're just being boxed in.
Each one a kinetic explosion of terrifying proportions. And the air was not just thick with one tranche of them. No. The bubble chuckers just kept on firing, making a never-ending barrage of the globes of doom.
Just like if you were trapped in the middle of a colony of jellyfish, you know, all around you.
Things now seem to be going quite well on the right flank. Certainly enough for Kronan to not want to execute him, thought Grinner. The center. Kronan looked down on the collection of vile traitors to their race. The flanks seemed to be held by the oddie ones, the snot guard, the beaky one, and the fop servants. They were rabble, but Kronan knew that they would be difficult to shift. They had been making sacrifices to their gods, and were more potent due to this. Not that Kronan would have put it that way, as he was not really known for his verbosity. He may have mentioned something about their fightiness being better. Yes, let's go with that. They were more fighty, but not in a good orky way, mind you. For he now looked down on the central block of the enemy. They were obviously old storm boys, for they stood at attention in ranks, all equidistant. Yuck. Pathetic. And it was certainly nothing he would have involved himself in anyways. Apart from some odd and off-colour tactics, what bearing did it really have on the battle? None. Not really. Well, to say that is rather an underestimation, it could be said. But Kronan did have some plans, just in case the Juice God tried to pull a fast one. Was he not Kunnin? Of course he was. Hence, astride his Kunnin mobile, he bellowed his order to charge. And it was a glorious event for Kronan, for his one scream motivated and animated thousands of orcs to move as one. And they pelted it towards the milling enemy. Kronan had to fight every instinct in his being to not jump out from his ride and join them. In fact, it was rather a close-run thing that he did not just grab the driver of the Kunnin mobile and launch him away and take over, for the Kunnin mobile was the best muggins and bling he had ever seen.
Yeah, it must feel weird though. Like, you're in this Kunnin mobile, you're in the back seat, you're on your thong, and you're watching everybody just running or on their bikes and just proceeding, going forward to the enemy. And you would feel anxious because, I don't know, like, you're in this relaxed position, sitting on this throne, and you're not the one who's driving the vehicle, you're not the one that's running towards the enemy. And it just makes you feel this way that, you could do more, but you're here, on this chair and taking command. So yeah, I understand how Kronan might feel that, I wish I could just chunk this driver away and let me just take control of my own vehicle. So yeah.
Not in its current form, of course, for at the present it looked like a slightly oversized battle wagon, and not a particularly impressive one either. For the Dakar was exceptionally light for a ride of a warboss, let alone the big boss of an entire war. And so it was that the centre engagement began. The ranks of Red Orcs advanced in lockstep at first, but when they had gotten to a certain distance from the onrushing war, they broke into a massive charge of their own. Dakar was exchanged as they approached each other, but all knew that this would be resolved up close and personal. For Dakar was adored by the orcs more than anything, apart from the one thing: chopper action. At this point, Kronan watched his first ranks go in. The boys of his war were large and surly, thousands of them. More than he had ever seen before in any one place, yet they were but the first serving. He knew that the Red Orcs would not fall easily, nor would it be anything less than the biggest fight he had ever been in before. His guts had told him, but also his dreams. For the night before this dawn, Kronan was struck with the most strange and troubling of dreams. He saw what was about to transpire, he was sure of it. But not much, of course. Mork did not wish to give him victory. Of course not. He would have to earn it the hard way. But Mork did wish him to know the magnitude of his danger, so he could perform his role. He knew it now. Others had said it. He had ignored them all as kiss-lumps and toadies. But now, what others suspected, he now knew. He knew it in every bulging bicep, every pectoral, every inch of his massive frame. But more, he could feel it in his brain. That almost pointless element for any orc, for him, was a mighty weapon unto itself. For he was Kunnin personified. He was as to Mork, as Ghazghkull was to Gork. Of course, Ghazghkull was the bigger and meaner, much more glorious and orky big boss. But Kronan had his place as well, for he would one day perform acts as glorious as legendary. Yet, where the power of Ghazghkull was clearly that of Gork, for Kronan, his benefactor was Mork, and by Mork, he was about to dish out a legendary thrashing. He had not so much planned this battle, as permitted his power to speak through him, to direct his boys as should be done. He had secured his flanks with Gitskush and Grinner, had negated any possibility of Tober and his scum from retreating via the use of Ducker von Smashhoven. But he knew just as deeply, just as truly, that none of it really mattered. The battle would be decided in the center. It was he against Tober.
As it should be.
It was Mork against the combined power of the Hume guards, but the Juice scored the most. Who was the real war god? The snivelling skull arranger, or Mork?
Mork. Always Mork.
Not Gork, of course. That would be a laughable mismatch. But I digress. Kronan watched as the Red Orc slammed into his own green lines, and carnage ensued. It was magnificent. Yet, as the armies consumed one another, he saw the reserves of the Red Orcs come forward. They had their own mega knobs and flash kits, also some red spiky things, which he could only guess as being the servants of the Bone One. Kronan had his Kunnin mobile move forward, but at the prearranged signal, it slowed. Only creeping forward now, he leapt from its roof and landed amongst his real push. Kronan barged his way forward through the ranks of his utter and total Black Legion. Thousands upon thousands of mega-armored orcs. For replacements to his legion were easy to find. Aye, many had fallen in his scrap with Toothspasher and his speed war, but many had merely been crippled or injured. And it had only taken a few days for a good percentage of them to be back in action. The rest were taken from the many, many volunteers that came forward to claim the mega armor of the Fallen, and they grew apace with Kronan himself. Hence, even in the last week or so, they had gained enough bulk to fit out their armor nicely. And so it was that Kronan strode forward at the head of his Black Legion, right in the middle of the fray, right into the middle of the Khornate worshipping Red Orcs. Kronan's arms rose and fell. Each time, multiple Red Orcs died with each swing of his mighty power choppers. He was like a particularly eggy combine harvester rushing through a field of snotlings. His ire was so vast, his power so unfettered. And to his sides and rear, his legion fared as well as he. The Red Orcs were excellent for stomping and crumping Humies, but all of their discipline and ranks did nothing to match the fury of the brightest and most stabby blades of the waaargh. Kronan hacked his way toward the center banner. It was obviously Tober's, and he was making healthy progress. It was then that a huge scream rent the air. The blood, the skulls, the unadulterated slaughter that ensued had empowered the forces of the bony Bondslover, and it was then that he watched as Tober rose into the air, red energies, blood, wind and power surrounding the wretched traitor. Alas, it was then that the air split, and everyone on the field was knocked down by a massive burst of air. A burst which centered where Tober had been floating. And when Kronan looked up, righting himself almost immediately, that he spat, then gave a growl, and then smiled.
Is Orktober augmenting himself? Is he imbuing himself with more power? Oh gosh, okay. Where will this head now for Kronan? Because he might be even more dangerous now. Orktober, I mean. Very, very dangerous.
At last, a real challenge. For in the place of the annoyingly runty Tober, there now stood a 20-foot being of claws and teeth and wings and burning axes. Tober,
a demon,
had become. He had transformed into a greater demon of the Hume gods. The left flank. All had been blown over, their rides scrabbling to regain their footing. Squigs had been caught in the blast and thrown like a huge collection of exceptionally bitey confetti. Gitsquisher McMurdo was barely able to keep standing himself. He had planted his feet and then his weapons into the ground as a wave approached, Tiddles biting onto his backpack to stand firm as well. Now McMurdo was not sure if Kronan had sent Tiddles to support him, or if the massive ball of teeth had simply joined in the charge of the Squigs and Beast Snuggers, but either way, he was amused and entertained by the presence of the pet of Kronan. Of course, Gitsquisher had a slight inkling that perhaps Tiddles was actually here to eat him at the end of the battle.
If he wanted to eat you, he would have eaten you a long time ago. He's not here to eat you. He's not interested in that stuff, you know? Yeah.
But then, he looked forward to the fray, if that was to be the upshot. But as the winds passed and the bellow of the demon arose, Gitsquisher was more than amiable to the huge squig being at his side. For the distraction at the center of the battle now gave him his opening. He could see the one other being still standing after the shockwave, the one holding onto the banner at the center of this band of scum. Without even a nanosecond of hesitation, Gitsquisher powered towards the leader of this segment of the horde. He could concentrate entirely on those to his right side, as his cyber legs took him forward at the speed of a cannonball. He used his choppers to take the heads off any in his path who were getting up, any who posed a potential delay to his course. And to his left, Tiddles the Mighty, with a horrifyingly vocal 3 weird boys now screeching at the tops of their lungs, all still struggling to attempt to extricate themselves from Tiddles' posterior. But none could, for they had been stitched on by Hypercrates himself. These stitches would hold. And thus it was that Gitsquisher McMurder came finally to the banner bearer, the leader of this host. Tiddles, being the helpful chap he was, attacked all of the bodyguards of the nasty wretch. McMurder had a clear chance. The orc in front of him was a size of 3, but only wide. His height was only that of a standard orc, but the rolls of flab and drops of mucus and pus that came from it like a waterfall in slow motion were rife. It held
Burn it. Burn it.
a massive chopper of its own, serrated, huge and icky. It had no power field around it, nor was it a chain weapon. The strange orc did not scream or shout. He just stood there, silently. The flabby orc just leered at him, as McMurder charged. His first strikes were blocked with contemptuous ease, the orc being almost sanguine and languid in the midst of the duel. It chortled a little, but in a way that made Gitsquisher shudder, for it reverberated many times and was not the laugh of any orc at all. Now, shuddered is probably the wrong word, but it did creep him out a tad. Of course, this did not stop McMurder from making a dozen slashes at the fiend. As the orc had inches of its lard cut off by Gitsquisher, it barely noticed. It felt literally no pain, did not worry about even huge lumps of it falling to the ground under Gitsquisher's assault. Its riposte finally came, just as Gitsquisher overextended. You see, he was getting rather knocked off and not striking a palpable hit, so he let the frustration get the better of him. As he hauled his choppers over his head, the huge green turd darted in with a speed he had not displayed before. The Chaos Orc chopper came in and embedded itself in the right arm of Gitsquisher.
Oh no. Oh no. Don't you have like a flamethrower or something that can explode Squisher? Oh gosh.
As if it were made of paper, or something like that. The Chaos Orc ducked and just leered at Gitsquisher, with a na look on his face, as he nodded to the arm, as if permitting McMurder time to see what was about to kill him. And so it was that Gitsquisher did indeed look at his arm as directed. There he saw the metals encrusting in rust and dust, a creeping phage that was to be his doom. But in that instant, Gitsquisher beamed back at the Chaos scum. He did this while pushing a button on his upper deltoid. Now he had not seen the point in the button when he had woken from his operation all those years ago, and it had actually caused a bit of inconvenience when it had been hit in other previous frays. But now Gitsquisher knew that it had been put there for this very circumstance, rare as it might be. And a small set of charges exploded in his shoulder, and the arm blew some 3 paces away to his left. The chortling from the Chaos Orc then became a bit of a squeal as, with a rage and satisfaction of equal degrees, Gitsquisher turned on his power claw and picked up his arm. The energies of the claw seemed to singe off the contamination, and with a pleasure rarely seen even in orcs mid-battle, Git Squisher McMurder then proceeded to beat the Chaos Orc to death, using what remained of his own metallic arm as a bludgeon. In future days, when the story was recounted, which will be often, if any bright spark ever mentioned the McMurder could have just used his power claw, well, that heckler was then given the honour of a reenactment of the arm smashing down on their head and torso until they were a smush.
Just celebrate, guys. Don't question it. Just celebrate.
Git Squisher's victory was a turning point on his side, and the Chaos Orcs now turned to flee. Alas, so many of them were so fat and pasty that they merely waddled off, which was certainly no way to escape a battle-frenzied horde of true orky orcs. It became a slaughter, and the left flank was utterly smashed.
Good, good. Oh, I'm happy.
The centre. Kronan snorted as the winds blew, then subsided, and in that place a mighty demon stood. Its wings were blacker than night, its hooves the size of wagons, its arms the width of mighty oaks, its head horned and breathing fire. It held 2 choppers the size of a man or more in the blade head alone, not even factoring in the haft. Kronan looked at the thing of nightmares, hawked and spat and thought, what a showy ponce. The Red Orcs roared their victory, for surely none could stand against such a powerful combatant. None. The fools. They did not know the ways of Kunnin. They had turned their backs on the true path, the way of waaargh, the love of the great gods Gork and Mork. Mork being the particular deity in question on this occasion, it was true, for Kronan was ready. Now, not at one point did you stop to ask me why the Kunnin one, Kronan, Lord of the waaargh, would lower himself to ride such an unbecoming vehicle as the lackluster Kunnin mobile. I can understand the wish to be surprised, though, so let's find out. And so it was that Kronan gave the signal to his battle wagon. Well, more to put it, the drivers and crew within. For Isaac Newtone was also ready. And at his instigation, levers were pulled and buttons were punched by his attendants, a few sharp kicks and slaps harrying on those who were agog at the huge red adversary that had just hove into view, of course. And it began. For, as I mentioned before, the Kunnin mobile was indeed more than meets the eye. And within only a minute of tortured metal screaming as it moved, the cogs and shafts, chassis and entire frame had lurched, chugged, then erupted into a very strange activity.
So, is it... what's the word I'm looking for? Is it like a transformer, a Cybertronian? Is it transforming into something else? Okay, that's interesting. Wow.
It seemed that the wagon was performing origami or origami on itself as it shifted. And when the squealing had ended, there it stood in all of its proper splendor. For the Kunnin mobile had transformed into a huge battle cannon, and had now unleashed its first shots into the demon. The energy that erupted from it was so powerful that it singed the hair squigs off every orc it passed over, its light so dazzling that many were blinded. And when these shots hit the demon, they tore into its shields and then threw them, like an egg being hit by a hippopotamus dropped from high orbit, or something like that. The defenses of the demon dropped, and the second blast tore one of its wings clean off. The energies of the warp that formed the wing smashed and scattered like glowing bugs on a midsummer's night. The demon, Tober, howled its pain into the skies. Yet, when it brought its head down to look at the cause of its pain, it saw a small speck of green approaching at speed. By the time the demon could focus, the speck had enlarged to a massive form. Well, it would have been massive had Tober been of normal proportions, but even so, the speck was now clearly an orc who held a massive chopper. For during the firing, Kronan had strode back to the point where Madnut Krunkelstein had been lurking, as instructed by his lord. The Madnut had called forth the power of the war as he had never done before. To be honest, it was a minor miracle unto itself that his noggin had not exploded and spread his brains across the plains like a musk spreader on overdrive.
That's what I was thinking, because you know what happens to weird boys when they use too much power. They do become volatile and, they tend to explode. So, yeah, interesting.
But it didn't, for he was also touched by Mork. And so it was that he had cast his most potent spells onto his lord, with the power of the jump, and with the energies of the weird boy enhancing him. Kronan took to the air in one huge bound. And as he shot through the air, he could feel the power of the war around him, as he did in the fighting arena when he confronted and crumped Tooth Smasher. He could feel the power of his people coursing through his veins, surrounding him and binding him. It was like a huge force. Kronan then did as he had before. He started to believe. Anyway, Kronan forced all of his own faith in himself, in his guards, in Kunnin, in the manifest right of might that was always the orcs. And his chopper took on a field of power that was the will and energy of the entire war given devastating form. And without so much as one blow struck, one sweep of its weapons, one beat of its remaining wing, the shocked and stupefied Tober in cornate form watched agog as Kronan smashed his chopper into its skull, right between the eyes.
I love it. I love the fact that he's incorporating World of Warcraft. Which one was it? Warlords of Draenor. Yes, Warlords of Draenor cinematic. I like that.
It was as if the entire battlefield was watching. All stood slack-jawed and wide-eyed as Kronan's blow carved into its head and then straight through it. The two halves eventually falling asunder like a banana peel under his assault, as Kronan did not slouch and yanked it from the impact spot and repeatedly hammered it into the head of the demon as it was falling backwards. Kronan had stepped off the head, just as it was about to impact with the ground. He landed hard, and then slowly stood and watched the demon expire before his very eyes. On impact, the demon was already becoming blisters of light that rose slowly into the sky, a wind blowing them away as they faded fast. Kronan alone heard what the demon Tober had whispered to him as he was banished, a concern for the future, for this would not be the last time that they would meet in battle. Of this, Kronan was certain. The hunt for Red Orktober was over. He was done. And that meant one simple thing, but a magnificent one. With Tober's death, and the rampant slaughter of his Chaos Orcs now a formality only, Kronan had done it. Kronan now marched towards his Kunnin mobile and stood atop it. He raised his chopper in the air, the last of the Chaos scum being dealt with as he did this. The entire field now chanted his name, Kronan.
Kronan, 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 Kronan.
Kronan! Kronan! For he was now the undisputed big boss of all Orkidom on Aquilonia. To be continued.
Guys, yes. This was the hunt for Red Orktober, Legend of Kronan by Baldermort's Guide to Warhammer. Yes, we were going through the aftermath of the battle between Tooth Smasher and Kronan, and the victory parade they had for 5 minutes. They had for 5 minutes, and then Kronan had to rest. They operated on him. They gave him the arm of Truth Smasher, and then he had a Thinkmas session, and he was organizing plans on what to deal or how to deal, I should say, with October, and how to find where his clan is. Those who worship the Chaos Gods, and it was quite interesting to see how the Speed War bosses and the Cunning War bosses, they generally didn't fight amongst each other. They went into line. They followed the war boss, and they also took the commands of the war boss to spread out and search out for Red Orktober. And when that final battle did come to the fore, all of Aquilonia should have been there to witness this battle. The humans or the humies should have sent like spy drones or something just to go and watch this war, so that they can learn to see how the orcs are fighting amongst each other and what they can do to negate something like this, because Kronan has now become the true and only leader of the orcs on Aquilonia, and his next target is the rest of humanity on the planet. So yeah, they better prepare themselves. This battle was amazing. The left flank, the right flank, and in the center as well, how all the different bosses were fighting against the chaos worshipping orcs, and also Tiddles was there with his force. That was so amazing and so cute at the same time. And yeah, I was so disturbed with the Nurgle worshipping orcs. Like anyone who worships Nurgle, right? I am disturbed by whoever does that, because the way they look, it's just unbelievable. It's just nasty. It's disgusting. It's the stuff of nightmares, And also when Baldermort was discussing about the orcs that worship Slanesh and what they were doing, oh my gosh. I need to erase that thought out of my mind, because no, I can't imagine orcs doing that. I mean, do they even have the anatomy to do that with each other? Do they have it? I don't think they do. Maybe they do, but I can't tell really. So yeah. No. I can't think about that. It's too much. But yeah, this fight was amazing, and it seems that October is still going to exist. Yes, he died now by the hands of Kronan, but he will return, because now he's a greater demon, and the Chaos God, I think it's Khorne. Yeah, Khorne is going to keep using him for whatever reasons that Khorne might have, so he will return. I don't know if he will return on Aquilonia, or will he be terrorizing and pillaging and destroying other places in the galaxy, but definitely October will return with his wings and his hooves and his big stature and everything. Yeah, but I'm sure if he returns to Aquilonia, Kronan will be ready for him. And yeah, guys, this war was amazing. It was really, really amazing. Very enjoyable to listen to, as Baldermort, describes the various, units and factions in the orc side, and then the fighting against the Chaos Demon worshipping orcs, and some of Slanesh humans came by, with their own rides. I don't know what kind of beasts they were riding, but yeah, they looked interesting. Yeah, very interesting. They were also fighting against the orcs. That was amazing. And of course, the orcs are enjoying this, More battle, more firepower, more death, they're there for everything. So yeah, it was really a party. One no orc should ever miss. If you're on Aquilonia and you're missing this party, then I feel very sorry for you. I really, really do feel sorry for you. This was good. Guys, if you want to check out the original video as well as Baldermort's Guide to Warhammer, remember the links are in the description below. If you like my reaction, please give me a like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Click on the notification bell if you want to be up to date with my latest videos. And I'll see you guys next week. Okay? Bye-bye. Kronan!